Full Stack Web 13. This is a module review on tooling, React tooling. By the end of this module, you should be able to demonstrate the ability to use create React app and to boilerplate a React application, and should be able to use prop types to type check specific data being passed down to a child component. We're going to talk about what type checking is and the different ways that we can use prop types to help us to accomplish these goals. So let's jump into create React app. This should be just a quick overview. It's a very short, small objective. So there are two ways for us to, well, let's talk about why we have create React app. When React first came into the world, there was, people were starting to realize that there was a lot of setup for every project that they had to, that they wanted to use React for. And so as they were setting up these projects, developers started experiencing what's called JavaScript tool fatigue. You can look that up. As it says here, there's a lot of articles written about it. Basically, it means that in order to use one tool in JavaScript, we have to import and install and set up and use 5 different tools just to get the one tool that we want to use. And those 5 tools that we have to install and use for our one tool that we want to use, some of those may need tools that we need to install and set up. So it's just this huge headache just to even start up a React project. So recognizing that, the team at Facebook created another JavaScript tool, created a really awesome tool called Create React App that basically does all of the boilerplate setup for us, so we don't have to go through the amount of work that it takes to set up a JavaScript project. So that's why we have Create React App, and it's been a huge help. It's one of the reasons I think that React really exploded and became so popular. I think without Create React App, it would not be as popular as it is today because of this JavaScript tool fatigue idea. So far in the projects that we've done and that you've had set up for you, we've been in files that were built using Create React App. So before you even got into this lesson and built your first project with CRA, you were getting used to the file structure, you were getting used to how it sets everything up. But let's explore that a little bit today. So there's 2 ways that we can use CRA to generate a React app. The first is to install it globally, and we would do that by, let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit. There we go. We would do that by going into our terminal, and we would say npm install. Actually, I don't think I've ever installed it globally. Okay, cool. So we added it there. So you can do that, or you can install a different tool. If you don't want Create React App installed globally, then you can use what's called npx. This isn't to confuse you by any means. It's just an example of 2 different ways that you can accomplish the same goal. So you can either follow this step and install this globally, and then we can just run create React app, and then the name of our app that we want to create. So helps if you spell it correctly. So this is one way to use CRA to boilerplate and create our React application. The other way is through NPX. NPX is a tool that will basically, well, this is a good explanation. It will install a few binary files, execute them to install your React app, as if you had CRA installed globally. But if you want to not install CRA globally, then this is a really great approach here. So let's do this one. Yay, we have our tool, we have our test. So let's do npm install -g npx. Awesome. So now we have npx and we have create React app both installed globally. So on my machine, I now have I can do either way. I can do create React app and then my project, or I can npx create React app and my project. And we'll take a look at this and see what differences there are, if any. Huh. It did not like that. Maybe you can't do that if it's installed globally. So I have one from earlier that I think we can reference right up. Oh, it looks like my shell ran out of memory. So let's try again. Create React app test npx. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at what create React app did. So, oh, it ran out of memory again. So let's look at the npx one that we just did, because they output the exact same thing. So it tells us that no matter which way we're following this, it tells us that it's going to create a new React app and then gives us the path which that's being created in. Goes through a few warnings. Because we are running yarn add right here. So it creates a React app and creates the files for us in this path, and then it starts installing our dependencies. And that's why we start getting this warning stuff. This is what you see every time you run yarn add for any project that you are coming into. So then we get our success, and we have 770 new dependencies, and then it lists out all of our dependencies just for our reference. So when you run one of these, just to review, it creates the file structure for you. It runs yarn add, and then it tells us what we can do to get started with our project. So even suggests cding into our new folder and running yarn start. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to look at the file structure itself. So let's pull that up in code. And while that is opening, Just gonna see if we have any questions. Okay, we're looking good. All right, so we can close these guys down. And here is our NPX created application. We've got our package JSON with our very basic dependencies. And then in our index, we've seen this. So just like the to-do project that we've done, just all the projects we did last week were set up with CRA. And this is the file structure that you saw as we did that. Stretch, there we go. So our index is in charge of rendering our app component to the DOM. Our app component is being imported from right here. So you should all recognize this code. We see this all the time right here when we get started with CRA. And of course, we've got our CSS. We've got our public files that this is where our React app is being installed to or being injected into, I guess. Yeah, and then our node modules, because running either of these commands, again, runs yarn install. So we have all our node modules set up for us. So if we look at the two side to side, we've got the exact same setup. So whether you use NPX, whether you install CRA globally, that is a totally personal choice. Everything is exactly the same. Cool. So now you guys know how to initiate a React project very quickly and get coding very quickly. Do you guys have any questions on CRA? I'll watch this for a second as I jump into the next, before we jump into prop types. Okay, cool. Doesn't look like anybody is typing. So let's move on with our module review. All right, so the second part of this module obviously has a little bit more to it. We're going to learn about prop types and what type checking is and why it's important, and learn how to use prop types to type check in our applications. So with prop types, I want to kind of give you a little bit of a background for why this is important. In JavaScript, JavaScript is a dynamic typed language, which means that we don't have to, you can create a variable and set its value to a string, and then you can override that variable and set a new value as an object or a function or something completely different. And there's a lot of back and forth between different people and their own opinions on whether this is a good thing for JavaScript or whether this is a bad thing. And I think it's both. I think it can be really good to help you stay flexible and help you develop as you want to. And I also think that it's dangerous because oftentimes it can lead to mistakes that are hard to find. It can lead to bugs that are hard to find because of mistakes that we make as developers. And prop types or type checking helps us to avoid those mistakes, but still keep a lot of the flexibility of this dynamic language, dynamically typed language. So I want you to imagine that you're working on a React project, and you have a container component that has some state on it, and it's passing down some data to some children components, and then you get done with that feature. You've built that component tree out, and you move on to another feature. And then after months or years or even weeks, you need to come back to that feature that you built and work on it some more. You'll find that after that amount of time, going back into a project, back into this code that you wrote, or even going into someone else's code that they wrote, it's hard to remember how things were working exactly, and be able to quickly jump in and do the new work that you need to do on this feature that you wrote a long time ago. So you need to find out how the components that you used work, and you need to find out what props you need to pass to this component, right? So we'll pretend that you're taking a component that you wrote and you're trying to make it reusable so you can use it somewhere else in your project. So in order to do that, you need to know what props need to be passed to this component. So there are a couple ways to go about finding that out. With what you know so far, you would have to look through the entire component, and you would have to find everywhere that this dot props is used, or props dot something is used, and then you'd have to make a list of all of those props everywhere in the component that those props are used, so that you pass down the correct props. But then before you can continue, after you've compiled this list, you need to know what those props even are. Are they strings? Are they objects? Are they functions? So there can be a lot of work to get to the point that you can say, okay, now I can start working with this prop again. So that's where prop types can really shine, because they are a way for us to index the props that are being passed down to a component. So if we were building out this cities list component, as you guys read about, I would first of all, I would look at this prop types object right here. And I would say, okay, in my props, for this component, I need to pass down an object for a city. So what does this object look like? Well, this object has a city, has a state, has a population, and a land area. So I need to make sure that when I reuse my cities list my cities list component, that I'm passing it a city object with these 4 properties on it. And looking at this object here, I can also tell that I can also know the types for each of my properties. So city and state are strings, and population and land area are numbers, as we see up here. So just by looking at this one object in the component, I already know exactly how to work with this component. Instead of coming here and where the component is built out and saying, okay, looks like we have props.cityObject.city, props.cityObject.state, and finding everywhere in the JSX that these are used. So this is a really good way to index for your future self and for other developers that are going to be working with this cities list component, for us to know exactly what we need in order to work with this. The other thing is, as I talked about, is being able to find or cap cap catch bugs before we send our project into the world of the internet. So the way that this helps is that, let's say you are comparing populations of different cities, and this has to be a number, but somehow someone was using this cities list component and decided to pass in a string as the population. Before they would be able to push this code live, they would get an error that would look something like this. So this isn't the exact error from our example, but they would get something that would say invalid prop of type number supplied to person. So for our example, if they were trying to pass a string to population, this would say invalid prop population of type string supplied to city list, expected number. So their app would fail before they even pushed it into production. Just because they pushed this as a string, they passed this down as a string instead of a number. So it helps us catch these bugs that can cause some really, really big headaches in production before it ever reaches production. Okay, so that's the two big reasons why we want to use prop types. We're going to type check so that we can avoid errors and avoid bugs in production. And we're going to index our component, the props that are being passed to our component. And we'll get into how we can make that feature even more powerful in just a second. So we're going to jump into Code Sandbox and put this into practice. We've got a long day, lots of lecturing today, so let's take a quick 5-minute breather, and then we'll come back and jump into that. I'm going to check real fast to see if we have questions. Okay. Looks like we're good. Follow the different threads there. Cool. Okay, let's do 5-minute break. I'll see you back in just a minute. All right. So let's take a look at implementing this into a actual component. First of all, I want to point you to this this site here. So this is React's docs on type checking with prop types. And it's a really great reference. Here is an example documenting all the different validators. So when we talk about type checking, we're really just validating the data that's coming into our component, right? I think that's a really good way to put it. Type checking is validating the data coming into our component. So there are a lot of different validators provided with the prop types library. And we're going to go over a few of these, not all of them. Some of them you'll have to learn as the project calls for it. So yeah, let's open up a new, Thailand today. New sandbox. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Up with the dog named Doug. And the dogs in that movie, they talk and they are constantly being distracted by squirrels that they hear off in the distance. So they'll be saying some sentence and then all of a sudden they'll stop and they'll look and go, squirrel. That's kind of my personality. Just in case you hadn't noticed, I do that sometimes. Okay, so we're going to create a React application. Ah, snap. So the way that we start with prop types is by adding the library prop types as a dependency. So we're going to add that. It was installed, and you can see now that we have prop types here. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to build out a we're just going to do this all on the same level. So I'm going to create a new file called person.js. And we're going to import React. And then we're going to import prop types from prop types, like so. Okay, now let's make a function called person that's going to take in some props and return some JSX for us. Right now we'll just say hello. And then of course, always, always, always export default. Save that, and we'll import that into here. Prop types doesn't like prop types. I think it actually has to be capitalized. There we go. Now it should recognize that. Okay. So then let's do relative to person. Aha. So this is, as you can see here, this is the way that the name of the package. So, okay, so importing prop types from prop types. All right, so let's do, we're going to, now that we have person here, we're going to do person, capitalize, of course. And there we go. We've got our hello, we've got our person here. So let's build out person. We're going to pass person 3 props. We're going to pass a first name, and we'll call it, we'll say this is a string. So remember, if it's a string, we can do it inside brackets and then inside something like that, or we can do just our string. Doug, last name is going to be Doug. Since Doug is a dog, we'll just say doggy. Doug doggy. Doug doggy. And we're going to give our person or our dog a hometown. Let's slide this over a bit. Come on, slide. There we go. Hometown of, oh, I forget what the falls were. We'll call it, we'll just say Cedar City, which is a city here in Utah. All right, Doug Doggy from Cedar City. So we're passing these props down, and if we open this up and we inspect, and we make things a little bit bigger, maybe not that big, there we go. If we look at our React app so far, we have person that is being passed these props here. So inside our application, we are passing props down to our person component. We haven't done anything with them in our JSX, but they are here. So let's go into person and let's do something with our props. Okay, so we're going to do, let's just do a name. So we'll do props dot first name, and then props dot last name. And then we'll do an H4 and say from props dot hometown. All right, so we've got an unexpected token somewhere. At the div. There we go. Okay. So we're using our props, and we're getting Doug Doggy from Cedar City. So let's look at how we can now type check with our prop types. So our prop types is used on the person component like this. We're going to say prop types and this has to be lowercase here. So person.prop types, and then we're going to create an object with all of the props that are coming into this component. So right now we know we have 3. We've got first name, last name, and hometown. We're going to set these all up as properties on our prop types object. Okay, so we've indexed what props are coming in, and this reflects exactly what the props object is looking like right now. The properties on here should reflect all the properties on your props. Now you can set up a prop types object without one of the props on that's coming into this component, and it won't break anything. This is your project will run just fine. This is accepted by the JavaScript engine, and it won't throw any errors. I highly, highly, highly suggest that you include every prop type, even if it's just being passed through to another component, or maybe you're not using it quite yet. It is very good practice to name everything here so that we are properly indexing the props being passed to this component. Okay, so now we get to type check each of these properties here. We know from here that they're all strings, so let's just tell our person component that it is receiving all of these as strings. Okay, so let's look at the syntax here. So person is our component that's being exported down here, right? This gets created, and then every component in React has a property on it called prop types. If we don't do this, then that property is going to be empty, and our React application is just going to run without any type checking. But we have the opportunity to set up our prop types object, which is a property on this component that we're creating. Okay, so that's why we have this syntax here. This, again, I'm going to reiterate that everything we're doing here within React is JavaScript. Person is a React component, but at its very basic context, it is an object. So person is an object with properties on it. And one of the properties is prop types, which happens to be an object. So we are going to define the value of this property. So we talked about what to list here. We want every prop that's coming into this component. So now let's look at this part of this object. So prop types, this is what's being passed in or imported right here from our prop types library. So you'll notice that that this has to be cased and spelled the exact same. If we wanted to do that, then we would have to change all of these. You can see the ones that I change don't have an error. The ones that I don't change now have an error because they don't match what's happening here. And then as we change them, they now match that. I think it's the general practice is to make this a capitalized camel case here. Okay, so we're using this from our library, from our dependency, and we now get the option from this list of all the different types of things that we could pass to our component. And we're passing a string, so we're going to say dot string, dot string, dot string, dot string. So let's look real quick at a couple of the other basic data types that we could pass in. So we've got string listed here. We can do prop types.array. We can do prop types.boolean, function, number, object, string, and symbol. These are kind of the basic ones that you can infer pretty quickly on what is being passed down with all of these. So let's say we wanted to do something like this. Now we've got a new prop. We have to add it to this. You'll notice that that I try to alphabetize, which means we have to move this one down. This is a personal preference thing, and sometimes your team will make you do this. It's up to you right now on how you're ordering these properties. Okay, so now we're being passed age to this component, and it is being passed a number. So we type it as a number here. Okay, and we can say something like age is prop types.age. Something like that. So we've got a couple different types now. Just very basic data types that we're working with. So let's change the names to be combined into a name object and look at a couple different ways that we can use objects within prop types. I'll check Slack real quick, see how we're doing. Lots of things. Yay. That is one of my favorite lines. Cool. Oh, some help out. Thanks, guys. Yay. Let's see. Yes, this is so true. Okay, I think we're good. Oh, let's see. What would be the benefits of using prop types over TypeScript? Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Tom, is that if you use TypeScript, there's a lot more. It's just another tool. So we started today talking about JavaScript tool fatigue, and using TypeScript can just be another tool and more work. I think there's some great benefits to using TypeScript. So if you want to, that is a great option. But if you don't want to get into the extra tooling and therefore a larger code base and all the extra work that goes into doing that, prop types is a really great way to protect yourself using type checking without bringing in something like TypeScript or Flow. Okay, great question. Thanks, Brian. All right, let's finish this up. And we're going to change. In here, we're going to take out, or we're going to make this a name object. And it's going to have two properties on it. Okay, let's start collapsing these down so we can see everything that's going on here. Doesn't like having that. Oh, okay, so it doesn't like this because I'm not actually passing in an object yet. These brackets are just to say, okay, some JavaScript's coming in here. So if I want to pass in an object, then I need to actually make it an object like so. And then of course, comma, like that. So now you can see we're passing in an object into the name. Okay, and everything is broken. So that's because we're trying to call props.firstname, props.lastname, which we now don't have. we now have props.name. This prop is an object. And we could simply just do this, and this will work, and this will pass the correct typing, and you'll see that it's going to run without any issue. But this kind of defeats the purpose of like the reasoning behind bringing in the prop types library. Because even though we've indexed name, we now have no idea what is on the name object. So if you ever catch yourself typing this, proptypes.object, I want you to stop, and I want you to erase object, and I want you to type out shape. What is shape? So let's look. Where are you, shape? Let's find it here. Okay, here's shape. So an object taking on a particular shape. So when we use shape, we have shape is a function, and we're going to pass it the shape of, we're going to pass it a new object, which is going to be the shape of the object we're passing in. So we're going to invoke this, and we're going to pass in an object, and we're going to look at what our object looks like. We've got a first name and a last name. So we're going to say first name, and we know that first name is a prop type. We're going to use prop types now on everything inside this object. This is a string, and last name is prop types dot string. There we go. Okay, now we have properly indexed our component. So now I can still come into person, I can look at our prop types. I know the 3 props that are being passed here, and I know what name looks like. I know that it's an object, and I know what it looks like. Okay, sometimes you'll get, you'll start nesting these pretty deeply. Typing's hard on a Monday, even though it's a Tuesday. So sometimes you'll have objects inside objects inside objects, and you can nest these in pretty deeply. And that's okay. You just want to make sure that this is exactly reflecting the properties that the props that you're expecting for this component. Okay, the last thing I want to look at is passing in arrays. So let's say, or let's not pass it in yet, let's define it first. Let's say we want to define hobbies for Doug. So we're going to create an array of hobbies. Now again, just like object, you can simply do this, but it doesn't quite explain, it doesn't quite tell the story of what this component is expecting. Okay, we want this to be very explicit to other developers and to ourselves in the future of what is happening inside this object. So instead of using array, we're going to say that we have an array of, and then define some something inside the array of, so that we know what this array is built of. So let's find this inside our documentation. Okay, an array of a certain type. Get out of there. There we go. So prop types dot array of, and then we pass in a type. So prop types dot number in this case. For us, since we're listing out hobbies, we're going to say prop types dot string. We're going to pass in an array of strings. So now we are telling a lot better story to future developers of what is happening inside inside this component. Okay, so we would have hobbies is going to be an array, and fetch and eating snacks. Cool. So arrays and objects, please remember to tell a better story than just typing array or object. And then the last one that I want to go over just really briefly is sometimes we have a situation that we're getting, usually this happens when we're getting data from a server, from a database, that we have a prop being passed to our person or to our component that could be one thing or another. Like we'll say maybe hometown is a string. Maybe we're just getting a string back in one instance, but there's also the possibility that we're getting an object back that describes the hometown a little bit more. So if that's the case, if we're not 100% sure that this is always going to be a string, sometimes it could be an object, then we've got a special prop type for that. And that is one of type. And we invoke one of type, and we pass it an array. So we're going to say this prop type is one of the multiple types that are inside here. So now we'll say prop types, well, we think it can be a string, excuse me, but it could also be an object, but I'm not going to type out object because I just told you not to. So an object with a town on it, and we'll say county. So now, this does happen. You'll see a prop come down that it's not always guaranteed to be one different type. It could be one of several types. So you can use that as well. Also, if you want to, say we had something, this will be the last thing, and then we'll have a little break before our next lesson. Let's say we're passing down gender, and you're super old school, and so you're going to say that gender is, there's only 2 types of genders. I don't want to get into anything political because that's not what this class is for, but we'll just say that our person is expecting either a male or female to be passed in as gender. So we can do prop types dot one of, not one of type, just one of. And then we'll say male, female. So now if gender gets passed in as something outside of that, outside of male or female, then your project would throw an error, and you wouldn't be able to push this to production because you have errors happening. So let's review real quick. We've got some basic types. like age is a basic number. We've got, when we're passing down arrays, we can tell our component, we can tell other developers here what to expect inside the array. Quick side note, when you're building data and you're passing arrays around, it's pretty general practice to not have multiple types inside a single array. So usually you'll just have strings. You won't have an array with strings and objects and numbers that you're using for data. So just a heads up on that as you continue, especially as you get into backend and computer science stuff. Hometown is a dynamic type, so it could be either a string or an object. We've got objects that we're defining the shape of the object. And then we've got some that we want very specific values, so we can tell it the exact values that we want passed in. So we could say other here, and now we're politically correct. So if anything outside of these three strings is passed in, if you misspell something, then it will not be accepted into this component, and you get an error. Okay, there we go. We'll come back in about, let's take a 7-minute break. Before we do that, I'll check for any last questions. Yeah, seriously. Okay, what if it is an array of strings and numbers? There we go. So there's the answer for that. I think I talked about it at the end. We try not to make arrays with different things on it. That's kind of considered bad practice there. Can you break it by changing one of the properties to something that is not a string and show us? Yeah, let's do that right after the break. We'll come back and do that. That's great right there. Okay, so I'll post the sandbox and then we'll go into a little bit of a break here. Okay, go get a drink, walk around for a second, clear your mind, and I'll see you in a few minutes, ready for our next lesson. All right. Welcome back. Let's see. So let's do these last quick examples, and then we'll switch into our next lesson for our next module. And Nate, I'll have you stop the recording on this one, and then we'll start a new recording for the new module. So we can split those two videos up. Okay, so real quick, we're going to, we see everything that we are expecting here. Let's pass in a string for age instead of a number. And then let's see what happens. So then we get a warning. You'll notice that we're just getting warnings instead of the JavaScript breaking, because the JavaScript is technically okay. Like there's nothing wrong with displaying a string here over a number. Like your DOM doesn't care which this comes in as. But we care as developers. So we get a warning from our prop type library that says failed prop type. So that tells us exactly what's going on. We're failing one of our prop types. The prop age of type string supplied to a person, but it expected a number. So it expected a number because here we told it would be a number. The error says invalid prop type age of type string supplied. So a string, even though we're expecting a number, a string was supplied. So that's what that error looks like. Let's look at one more. Let's say we have to have this name prop passed down, and I'll show you why we have to have that. So we're going to say that, let's just comment all of this out. We're not we're not typing right now. And we know we're trying to display first name, last name, but we forget to pass that in like this. Now JavaScript is actually breaking. Now your website is broken because there's no object called name on the props object, right? We're not passing it in anymore. We took it out. And on the name object, we're expecting a first name and last name. Well, the JavaScript engine inside your browser doesn't know how to grab first name if name is null or is undefined. So this is actually breaking. And you may not actually catch this. Maybe name is fetched from a server, from a database, and for some reason it doesn't get fetched one time, and your end user ends up getting a broken application. So even though you're doing everything you can to get name passed down to person, sometimes it just doesn't get passed down or whatever. So let's look at what we can do to help stop this. So scrolling. We need to tell all of our developers that are coming in and using person that name is absolutely required. So we're going to say that name, we're going to chain this right here, is required. So now when we save this and run it, we're like, okay, why is this not working? We can look up here and find another warning right here to help us figure out what's going on. So failed prop type, the prop name is marked as required, but its value is undefined. So those are the two errors you'll get. You'll get that that you've marked something as required, and now looking at this, whoever is working on this component can say, oh, okay, name is required and I forgot to pass that in. And then the other one is the error that we saw, that we were passing in a string instead of a number. Now you can tag this onto anything. You can chain this anywhere. So we can do that, we can do that, we can do out here, we can do inside our shapes as we did down here. We can do at the end of our shapes. We can do this, we can say, this is an interesting one. I don't know about this one. I don't know if that works there. We can say that hometown is required. So you can be very creative in how you want this. But also be careful because maybe age isn't always required. Maybe it's not a requirement to have age there. So you have to be a little bit smart about where you use required. On objects, that's where you're going to break run into this error that actually breaks the browser and throws an error for your end users. Okay, so there we go. There is prop types. Any last questions on? Oh, yep, just talked about that. So no, this is a good question. If we put prop types on name, if we put it here, does that automatically mean, and not up here, does that automatically mean that first name and last name are required? It doesn't. It just means that we're expecting a name object. Okay, this only requires what it's actually being tagged to, which is right here. So if you need first name and last name required, then you put it onto there. So let's say only a first name is required, then we'd be okay to do something like this. And we won't get any errors. Really good question. Okay, if there's not any other questions, then we will jump into our next lesson. Okay, awesome. Use prop types. This is a powerful, powerful tool to help you catch bugs before they begin and to help help tell the story of the component. All right, Nate, let's go ahead and stop the recording and then we will